Welcome home. We are WNST, AM 1570, Towson, Baltimore, and Baltimore Positive. We've still been offering lots and lots of our Crab Cake Row, a cup of Super Bowl. We had over 70 pieces with charities, many of them still making their way out to Baltimore Positive and out to the audio vault and wherever you listen to podcasts. We certainly hope you're setting your dial as we get ready for baseball and certainly draft and combine and all that at AM 1570. You can still set a place in your car when you're driving around. Lots of folks do that. We will be back out doing the Maryland Crab Cake Tour again with our friends at the Lottery, also with Window Nation and Jiffy Lube. I do not have the latest dates, but we are working on some things with Fadley's in regard to baseball season and the Orioles. And I am wearing my Curio Wellness orange and black and representing Lucas. Is football season really over? I mean, we're really going to go into like a baseball thing here where there's going to be news and good news and bad news. And Lord knows it didn't take long at spring training for the rotation. I was with Dr. Steve, and he's, trying to get into the baseball swing of things. Like we can all say McNally, Cuellar, Dobson, we can all say that. Not everybody knows, Bradish means, oh, does that mean Kramer's the 5? So we're going through this re-engagement of the baseball community. But Dr. Steve and I were like, all right, so what's the rotation now? All right, Burns would be 1. All right, that would probably make that would make Kyle 2, and that would make Grayson 3, and so it means I don't know, who knows. So all this happens, and then the first day of spring training, it's like, all right, number 2 pencil, that's baseball now, isn't it, Luke Jones?
I mean, it's really every sport, but more so than any other sport because of the fragility that is just the nature of pitching. Start of spring training is always that hold my breath moment. And it's not because someone actually gets hurt on the first day of spring training. It's because these guys who at this point in time start ramping up in January, some guys late December, depending on the start of spring training. But if you recall, the whole second half of last year, what were we talking about on the pitching side? Beyond just adding bullpen arms or adding Jack Flaherty, it was what? The innings management, right? The workload of a Kyle Bradish, a Dean Kramer, a Grayson Rodriguez, these guys who had all eclipsed career highs in innings. We talked about it with Felix Bautista even before he hurt his elbow in late August. How many innings the Orioles were relying on him to throw.
This is the science of all of it. When you and I fight and the scientists come in and they're like, man, dude's only got 180 innings, and Palmer's laughing at them, right? And Jim Cott's laughing at them, right? But I mean, there is a point where the way these guys work and throwing curveballs when they're 11 and pitching all summer when they're 13 and 14 and being baseball pitchers from the time they're 9 years old, their arms fall off when they're 22. Keegan Aiken and just all these names of like all 15 years of prospects for the Orioles. It felt like injuries always got Dylan Bundy before, it ever got there. And I worry about that with Means, Rodriguez now with the latest, which is really, this is disheartening because like you're sort of waiting for his arm to fall off, right? Like you've done this before. You're like, well, he's throwing a little bit, but this ain't going to work. In the same way Felix Bautista was playing patty cake back in September, right?
Well, I mean, there are examples of guys that have a UCL sprain and ultimately don't have to get Tommy John surgery. And, just in the same way that you mentioned 2 great names, Jim Palmer and Jim Cott, they had plenty of contemporaries who got hurt and then you never heard from them again. Why? Because Tommy John surgery didn't exist way back when. And pitchers have always gotten hurt. It's just you forget about them and you think about the big picture. And
why wasn't named after Don Sutton or Jim Cott or Burt Blyleven
or Whitey Ford
or Wilbur Wood or like exactly right.
Exactly. So it's always been part of the game, but we also do know in the modern day how pitching, the philosophy is max effort. You've heard me talk about that a lot. You've heard Jim Palmer talk about it a lot. It used to be for decades upon decades, pitchers paced themselves, right? So they were giving a certain percent effort, and they would rear back and throw it as hard as they can a few times a game, but that's not how pitching works today. So what that has meant, and to bring it back to the present and more specifically Kyle Bradish here, pitchers get hurt and it's part of the game. And I just saw it again, and I can't remember the source, but I think it was as of a few years ago, Nestor, I think it was a third of major league pitchers had Tommy John surgery at some point in time, whether you're going all the way back to high school, the minor leagues, or sometime during their major league career. I mean, that's just, it's part of
Here, let
the
me fix it
industry.
for you. Let me fix it
Yeah,
for you.
yeah. But that
It's like
said,
$6 million man, world, right? Literally, right?
it is. However, and because of that, because of how frequent it is, because of how prevalent it is, you'll often hear someone say, when you hear about a situation like Kyle Bradish feeling feeling something in his elbow and getting a diagnosis of a sprained UCL, what do you hear people say? Well, get Tommy John surgery. Why wait? It's inevitable. Well, John Means is now 22 months removed from Tommy John surgery. Not to say that he won't pitch and pitch effectively for the Orioles this year, but we've seen that has not been a completely smooth return of right up until he was ready to be the number 3 starter in their postseason rotation until he started feeling some elbow soreness in a sim game, in the 5 days that the Orioles had off at the end of the regular season. The point is, nothing's fail proof. Nothing's 100%. Nothing's certain, even when it comes to Tommy John surgery, which has, yes, a very high return rate, especially compared to where it would have been, 20 years ago or certainly 30 or 40 years ago. But there's still risk. There's still no guarantee. So if there is a chance, and look, this is a different scenario than Felix Bautista. It was very apparent. The Orioles knew almost right away that Felix Bautista was going to need Tommy John surgery, but the timing was not going to save his 2024. So all along it was, is there some path here, albeit a very unlikely one, that we're going to try to rest and rehab and have him throw, and maybe he can give us 5 to 10 innings in the
And a guy
postseason.
that's injured can throw the ball 102 miles an hour. Like,
Well,
that's insane.
I mean, maybe not 102. Is there a scenario where his ligament could have held up that he could have thrown 98? I don't know. Again, it didn't happen. There's no worse for wear. He wasn't going to pitch in 2024 anyway. The timing for this is a little more delicate, is a little more, a case of, okay, you can go the route of a PRP injection, which they gave him. You can go the route of him trying to throw, and you see how he reacts. I'll give you 2 names right now, recent history. Aaron Nola, great pitcher for the Phillies, right? All-star pitcher, just got a big extension this past offseason. I think it was late in 2016, 16 or 17 off the top of my head. I looked at it earlier this week. He had a sprained UCL. Now, clearly it wasn't a major sprain. It wasn't a major tear, but it was enough that it had shut him down for the rest of, I think it was in August, and he was done through the end of the season. He came back the following year, and every full season since then, I believe he's thrown at least 165 innings, and in many seasons more than that. Never had Tommy John surgery. And to this point, now 7, 8 years later, he's still going strong. Zach Gallen, who people gained some familiarity with in this past postseason, another pitcher who had UCL, elbow ligament concerns, never had Tommy John surgery. So Tanaka for the Yankees years back, that was a really popular example that people cited. So there are examples, there are exceptions, but yes, it's never a good thing, especially when you're talking about a pitcher like Kyle Bradish, who, as we know, led the American League in ERA in the second half of last season, comes into spring training and, back in January. And let's be clear, this wasn't something that he did on the first day of camp. They were aware of this, probably expedited their efforts to go get Corbin Burns, if we're being honest, even though Mike Elias downplayed that when asked about it in Sarasota. But
when did they say that they realized that he was injured?
January's typically, and again, it varies because some of these pitchers go to, they go to Driveline, they go to different academies, they work with private instructors, but typically major league pitchers in this day and age, they start ramping up throwing. They start a throwing program in January, and that's when Kyle Bradish felt this.
In the old days, that's what Messina would do. He would take off November, December,
right,
and in January he'd start long toss.
Right. So he started feeling it, and obviously the team sent him to get an MRI, and that's when they saw that there was a UCL sprain there. Now, they've expressed optimism. This hasn't been something where they've just said, okay, he's getting Tommy John, that's that, no chance whatsoever. They give him a PRP injection, which has worked for some individuals. Has it worked for a lot? The numbers.
Well, they express optimism. We express pessimism. And somewhere in there's the realism of what you're talking about, which is, if this happens to a third of the guys, it's happened
Yeah.
to half the guys on the team.
Yeah.
It's his turn. And the notion that he's going to be an Aaron Nola and not a Tommy John
It's
is
not great. Right. I mean, again, it's not a fait accompli. There are examples, and I'll continue to say that, but you also have to be realistic. You have to be pragmatic about this, and we understand what a UCL injury means for a pitcher. We understand what Tommy John surgery means, and the longer you go with pursuing seeing if rest and rehab works, it does, there is the reality of the timing of this running into his availability for the start of 2025 even. I mean, that's just where they are, where it is different from Felix Bautista, but
you're going to wait, but not too long.
Yeah, but at the same time, I use the John Means example as, okay, if it's a matter of 4 weeks, 4 weeks, you see how this goes, you see how he responds, and he ends up getting Tommy John surgery in early April, that's still, you want to still pursue the possibility. You still want to, all things being equal, you still want to avoid surgery if you can avoid it. I mean, that's just kind of a general rule of thumb, really, for anyone in life, right? I mean, anyone who has back problems. I mean, back surgery is a very touchy, very sensitive subject in terms of whether that's going to help someone or not. So you generally you do what? You go with more conservative measures.
You go to Planet Fitness and get in shape and get
you do yoga and things like that.
Yeah,
exactly. So it's not a completely different principle here, but again, we know the reality here. It's not good that you're talking about a UCL injury. For every Aaron Nola or Zach Gallen or Tanaka, there are many more examples that you think of someone getting Tommy John surgery. So we'll see how this plays out. He began a throwing program on Friday, starting with some light throwing, and we'll see how that works. Generally speaking, when you realize that's not going to happen, that will present itself fairly quickly. I'm guessing we'll have a resolution on Kyle Bradish at some point here in the next 3 or 4 weeks.
I was going to say St. Patrick's Day is what I was thinking.
Yeah. I mean, and look at someone like Dylan Tate, who wasn't listed as a UCL specifically. His was more of the flexor mass, which is in the forearm, but oftentimes it's connected and tied together as far as an injury. He did not have Tommy John surgery last year. He is supposedly healthy and he's throwing in Sarasota right now, but he still missed all of last season. So there's not a one size fits all here. I know it's a quick reaction, almost like I don't want to say it's fatalist because it's more realistic than anything when we typically see these kind of injuries, but it's why you do generally want to try to go the rehab route. You go the conservative route to see. And that the fact that they're even doing that tells you that, this isn't, he didn't rupture, it's not as though he snapped his UCL, right? It's kind of like a rubber band, or you think of like fibers of a rope. If just a couple of the fibers are frayed, that rope can conceivably still hold up for a really long time and still be fine. But if it's something that is a much more significant sprain or tear, then yeah, they wouldn't even try this. So that tells you that it's got a shot. I'm not saying it. I'm not going to sit here and try to put a number on it or that it's high percentage or likely, but you see how it works. In the meantime, you're even more thankful that the Orioles were able to get Corbin Burnes to headline your rotation, because Kyle Bradish was the ace last year and may not be available to them on the heels of Felix Bautista not being available to them in the bullpen. So, but you do have Corbin Burnes, you do have Grayson Rodriguez, you have Dean Kramer. I think for me, it's the trickle down effect. You and I have talked about this. We haven't talked about it a lot, but since the Burnes trade, I said that I still look at the bullpen as an area of question for me, knowing that you're not going to have Felix Bautista. You do have Craig Kimbrell now, obviously, but what's Yennier Cano going to look like this year? What are some of those other guys that you counted on, like Danny Coulomb, to look like in the bullpen? You don't have DL Hall in that bullpen. And for me, the trickle down effect here is Tyler Wells, who, it wasn't just me. I think a lot of people were looking at him as a really intriguing candidate to fill a late inning bullpen role, 8th inning, let's say. Now you look at it on paper, barring another acquisition, barring a signing, Tyler Wells very likely looks like he could be their number 4 starter to at least begin the season, knowing that Bradish isn't going to be there for opening day, even if he's able to pitch at some point, and knowing that John Means is not injured, but behind because they just had him shut down and rest for a longer period of time over the winter. So, hey, we always say it. I mean, we always say it with the Ravens. Ozzie Newsome said years ago, you can never have enough corners in baseball. It's what? You can truly never have enough pitching. I
You
mean,
know
it's
what,
just,
man? I was going to be the old fart, get off my lawn guy and say, is this where I'm allowed to like use all of those Bull Durhams? Because it really is, it's a Bull Durham,
yeah,
line. You can never have enough pitching, but
no,
you
it's
know,
true.
we sit here and talk about Burns and these other guys is I
Yeah.
don't know. I thought about Rodriguez last year and his sort of dead arm thing and where he was at that point and whether Means is really going to get back there because he got back there for like a minute and a half and flashed it and then it's gone. And I just all the way through, I would say at this point, what are their options at this point? Because a lot of the is were pipeline guys that are now here, like Rodriguez and these others, and Bradish came over in the deal and all that, but the we put so much on Holiday and the hitting, and who's going to
Hmm.
play shortstop and who's going to play second base and were they going to deal Westberg and the Mountcastles and the Hearns and like all of these guys. They there's not a lot to argue about with the lineup other than how to fill it out. Holiday sort of a foregone conclusion, and we'll do our segments, I'm sure, in the coming weeks, whether he's hitting 620 in spring training or a buck 20, in the first 30 at bats, because we'll take all those really, really seriously down in Bradenton the next couple of weeks.
Yeah.
But the pitching in general, I was going to make a joke, but you were sort of on a roll going through the bullpen and Kimbrel all the way down, and what's going to be Yenny or Cano's role, and I'm like, I don't think he's going to look ever again like he looked in the month of May last year. I don't know, but I'm not betting on that for any relief pitcher
Yeah.
that flashes in that way, right? So, and Batista's gone, and Kimbrel's on the other side of being like, uh, 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 he can only be disappointing for the amount of money they gave him. Even if he's really good, he'll blow a couple saves. We'll be pissed off,
Right.
but you better hope his arm doesn't fall off. I want to joke about Fuji, right? And say, well, who's going to be the Fuji this year? Who's going to be the Andrew Miller? Who's going to be the trading? Because they're going to need bullpen help, dude.
Oh,
They're
no
going to
doubt.
need more than what they have. It's going to be some guy who's pitching for the Rockies now or the Diamondbacks or whatever, because that's the way bullpen help works. And you and I get into all this with the Costa and football and whatever. These rush edges in the NFL, they're kind of like relief pitchers, right? Like they're all 30-something defensive linemen, whether it was the guy from Cincinnati that came here and played at the end, Damata Pekka, and but relief pitching's we know better than to think like, oh my God, it's Valentine's Day, we need relief. This is going to be all year long. They're going to be
Yeah.
dealing out of the depth of their situation. Whatever Westberg or Mountcastle or whoever is safe in a deal, they're not safe because July 28th, when they need to go get Mr. Big and Andrew Miller, these are the pieces. Even Cedric Mullins. I mean, they'll deal. Elias will deal players. I mean, because they have such wealth at the
Hmm.
position. And unless a guy breaks his leg or gets hit by a fastball or pulls a hammy or has an injury in that way, you're much more likely to have this attrition through pitching. And it's very, very unfortunate we're talking about this in February, right? Because when this happens on May 10th after 6 starts, we're like, well, that sucks. It sucks a whole lot more when it's February, but you feel like, well, they got time to prepare for it and maybe go deal for Dylan Cease or whatever, because this thing's not going to be done. They're a real contending team, and there's not a day. We used to kid Buck about hiding out pitchers in Norfolk and Lord Ottawa, Lord knows wherever else, Columbus. Um, they're going to use a lot of pitching, and it's pitchers. We can sit here and speculate all day, but they're going to deal. They're going to be in a position. They're going to have an ownership group. They're going to take on $18 million on July 30th and not care about it because
You hope. Yeah.
yeah, I mean, so when I see all of this, it sucks. Like when this is the first piece of news, because you really want to start from the strength of Dr. Steve and I over at LA Chiropractic saying, oh, well, Burns, Bradish, go through it. Kramer's number 5. Oh, Kramer's number 3. Might be number 2 if somebody gets a stiff arm and Rodriguez wakes up not right. And then all of a sudden, you're back to where you were last June saying, they're good, but, We felt really good the day we got Burns, but then Means didn't come back, and we got a knife into this one, and Rodriguez is, a little so-so right now for a couple of starts, even if they're making it to the mound and getting you 6 1/3. Pitching, dude, like, you
Yeah.
never have enough, to our point, but it's never over with, and it's never like a finished product because some team out there is going to stink and deal. Hey, look at the best player in the sport. He was a pitcher and a hitter till he wasn't a pitcher anymore, right? I mean, this pitching thing, what they do to these humans, they're not meant to do this like Jim Cotton, Jim Palmer did 50 years ago.
Well, they weren't really meant to do it either. They were the ones who endured, right? I mean, go back to the Orioles farm system of the late 50s and early 60s, and you'll find all kinds of pitching prospects who got hurt in a year or two, and then they were out of baseball.
I got a book here on
later.
Dalkowski.
Yeah,
you can have
exactly,
right?
exactly. So that's always been part of it, right? But I'm a couple things. Glad you brought up the farm system. Glad you brought up the fact that this was going to be a moving target. I mean, we were talking about this even before knowing Kyle Bradish, his situation with his UCL, not knowing what his availability is going to be. And
name me a team with their top 5 right now starters who are going to make all their starts and everything's going to be rosy, and they're going to have ERAs of 3.5 to stick around because guys get beaten in at the bottom of rotations on bad teams. So it's like, I don't know where the Fuji is, but that's sort of that's going to be my inside poker on this. They're going to go take a gander on a couple of guys.
Yeah, well, you hope they're better than Fuji if you trade for them. So, but yeah, I mean, hey, look no further than the American League East last year. Orioles, 101 wins. The Orioles rotation stayed extremely healthy. That is typically the exception. That's certainly not the norm. In contrast, the Tampa Bay Rays, who were right on the Orioles' heels until 3 days before the end of the regular season. Go look at the number of starting pitchers they had with Tommy John or other injuries, missing time. You need pitching depth. I mean, there's no question about it. So as much as guys like me just a week ago were talking about Tyler Wells maybe being their 8th inning guy, that's why even if Kyle Bradish and John Means were healthy and on track for opening day, what were the Orioles going to be doing with Tyler Wells and Cole Irvin anyway? Even if they were envisioned as being part of their bullpen, you're stretching them out. Anyone that has starter capability, that's why you stretch them out in the spring, because you don't know what's going to happen. I said the start of spring training every year, but even more so for the Orioles this year, knowing that these guys had set career highs in innings and not even accusing the Orioles of being irresponsible. I mean, Kyle Bradish, I think if you count the one rehab start he made in April and his postseason start, I think he threw a total of 33 more innings last year than he did in 2022. And this isn't an exact science. Let's be clear, because you made the point, and I'm not picking on you, but because lots of people say this, but none of this pitching stuff and these innings limits, they're guidelines. They're thought of as subjective best practices, right? The idea that you don't want a 22-year-old pitcher who throws 100 innings in the minors to suddenly throw 230 the next year. I mean, that's just kind of a common sense thing, and they do have player tracking and data tracking, and they can track your where you release it, your release point is, and the velocity, all those different things. There's so much science involved, but there's still art. There's still.
Dude, we did 4 months of summer last year talking about them shutting a young pitcher down, and they did. And the All-Star break, and they did.
And Tyler Wells got tired. I mean, you could see it. I mean, his effectiveness, his velocity, all that. But we also said at late last year, I know I made this point at least once or twice, and plenty of people did, not just me, but a big tell is not necessarily how they're feeling at the end of the season. It's when they pick up the ball in January and they start ramping up again. And it doesn't even mean they do that irresponsibly. It's just maybe there was some wear and tear that you're not going to notice right away, but you do after you take some time off. So point is, it's a moving target. Like you said, they're going to be in the market for relief pitching. We'll see what happens. Jordan Montgomery's out there. Blake Snell's out there. I'm not holding my breath on that one for the Orioles, at least at this point, until new ownership is officially in place. There are some pitchers, Lorenzen's out there, the first few days of spring training. There are some names like that, but at the same time, Tyler Wells, Cole Irvin. I'll say this, keep an eye on someone like Chase McDermott, who pitched pretty darn well when he was promoted to AAA last year. He was part of that package of prospects they got in the Trey Mancini deal a couple years ago. Keep an eye on Cade Povich, who was someone they got from the Twins in the Jorge Lopez deal a couple years ago. Guys that we're familiar with, like a Bruce Zimmerman. I'm not saying that anyone's excited about Bruce Zimmerman if he has to make 20 starts, but he might have to make a start or two at some point in time. And that's part of how this works. Again, you need deep depth.
And other guys are going to get hurt. They're going to lose 3 more pitchers before opening day.
Someone's going to turn his ankle during PRP drills in Sarasota. I mean, those things happen. I mean, inevitably that's going to happen. We haven't even mentioned Gunnar Henderson dealing with a little bit of an oblique issue. He's, by all accounts, should be fine for opening day, but it's how it works. That's why where the Orioles are now, coming off a 101 win season, all the expectations, and after having traded DL Hall and Joey Ortiz for Corbin Burnes, still the consensus #1 farm system in baseball. That's important. It's important for the future, and we'll see how this is going to work. And by the way, their 26-man major league roster is going to evolve over the course of the season. For me, we haven't even mentioned this, but I'm intrigued to see what the outfield's going to look like over the course of the year. I mean, Colton Cowser and Heston Kjerstad, I don't know what else they can prove at AAA right now. Now, that doesn't guarantee they're going to be on the roster on opening day, but
a lot of bodies, dude. Like I've been doing this for 32 years.
Yeah.
When you start talking about position players,
it's deep.
And them having too many of them and sending guys down to the farm and starting Holiday's clock and who's really going to be a shortstop and who's really going to be a third baseman. There's really important questions that they had to answer with Cal Ripken back in 1982, right? Saying, what is he? Where's he going to play? Who's going to play left field in the big left field that this team has here, right? What's the real future for Hayes and Mullins as they take on money and younger players come along and may be able to replace that? Maybe new ownership with Elias will want to spend the money on pitching. Yeah. I mean, this thing is really interesting, way more interesting than it's ever been on a day-by-day basis, and the intrigue of how they're going to run their business, what they're going to do, how the ballpark's going to feel, how they're going to unplug from 32 years of the Angelos family and really try to make sure people like Greg Bader aren't greeting people at the front door anymore, because it'll still feel like they're there. The first thing they need to do is make it feel like, and I don't know what that means for Rock Kabako and Masson and Rob Long and who's on TV and Kevin Brown. And, talking to insiders, they're like, I don't think there'll be any change this year at all. Like, they're just going to go as is. Yeah. And I'm like, as is tough when you get to August and September and there's really is a new ownership group and they really want to capitalize on things. And this place really hasn't been well run, just in a general, from how they sell hot dogs straight, other than baseball talent, they're fine with. And we could sit here all day and talk about possibilities of their players, but they have too many players and they don't have enough pitching, right? Like, I think we can say that out loud. There's going to be deals and Elias is going to try to get the pitching better. I'm convinced of that, because he knows what you know about Bradish, right? I mean, and he knows what you know about bullpens and about Craig Kimbrell and about where the middle of the game is going to be problematic. The less innings that Bradish's and Means's take up, because the quality of those innings goes downhill and you get to your bullpen in the 5th inning instead of the 7th inning. And
right.
That's the thing that you really talk a lot about in the season, is when they have these bad nights where they're using up a bullpen, that affects them on the weekend.
Yeah, right. I mean, you have a night where if your starting pitcher gets knocked out in the 3rd inning, I mean, that doesn't just impact you for the rest of that night. It's, if it's a Wednesday night when that happens, Thursday, Friday, Saturday, that's going to come.
Well, right now we're talking about a mystery 4th and 5th starter that we haven't even heard of, that we don't even know this person's name.
Well,
assume they're going to get knocked out in the 4th inning. That's why they're the 5th starter.
I'll say this though. Let's pause a little bit on that. I don't disagree with your general point there. And look, absolutely, they're going to be looking for more pitching, and they should be, and that will be an ongoing search, not just St. Patrick's Day, but Easter and Flag Day, the 4th of July, all the way up to the trade deadline. And even then, we saw them bring in Jorge Lopez after the trade deadline to try to fortify their bullpen late last year, even though they knew he wasn't eligible for the postseason. But I will say this: Corbin Burnes was not part of the Orioles last year, and they won 101 games. So let's look at it through the lens of, and I know the goal is to get better. And yes, they're going to be on the hunt, and there are going to be questions about the back end of their rotation. There were questions last year about the back end of the rotation. Tyler Wells, as much as I was just talking about him being in the bullpen and now he's number 4 starter, by the way, Tyler Wells was really good for the Orioles the first half of last year as a starter until he started to wear down. So my point is, if you still look at where they stand right now, knowing what's up with Bradish, John Means should be fine but he's a little behind. Hey, they didn't have John Means till September last year, so there still can be a net gain there with whatever he can give them this year. But the point is, you do have Corbin Burnes. That right now you almost have to view it through the lens of he's kind of replacing Kyle Bradish. And, you look at it from a track record standpoint, that's a net positive. Grayson Rodriguez, if healthy, and obviously that's the caveat for any pitcher, but if the Orioles get the Grayson Rodriguez that we saw in the second half for all of 2024, that's a net gain over whoever was taking starts in his place, Cole Irvin or whoever it was last year at some of those different points. From May until mid-July, late May until mid-July. You have Dean Kramer. As I mentioned, Tyler Wells, Cole Irvin. Even though it was a very rough start to last year for him, where he got demoted after 3 starts, he actually came back and pitched pretty well for them. Not as much in the rotation, and obviously he was in the bullpen, but when he returned from that early season demotion, he pitched pretty well for them. The point being, it's not as though Kyle Bradish just, this is the same rotation as last year, and then Kyle Bradish is hurt. They brought in Corbin Burnes, so at the very least, they're kind of. It's almost like they're back to where they were at the start of the offseason. But I will throw out there, Kyle Gibson was someone who gave you consistent innings, and he's no longer in the picture. So yeah, you're going to have to fortify this thing. There's no question. That said, I don't think this is a situation where you're pressing a panic button and you're saying that they're in deep you-know-what. They got some work to do. But at the same time, there were also guys at this point last year, like a Yennier Cano, for example, that we weren't even talking about. Yennier Cano, Ben McDonald even talked about this last season on some of the Mass and telecasts. He flat out said he didn't understand why Cano was even on the 40-man roster because he was so lousy for the Orioles when they got him from Minnesota. So the point is, you're going to have other guys step forward in the same way that you'll have some other guys get hurt. And yeah, you'll have some other guys will take a step back. That's how this works, especially when you get into relief pitching more than anything. It is like the stock market. Guys are up one year, they're down the next, right? And guys get hurt. Guys come back from injury and are bad, or guys tweak, with the Orioles, with their player development, we've seen them be able to tweak pitchers and add another pitch to their repertoire, or change this pitch, or alter their release point, or their wind up a little bit.
Yeah, so, who's the guy in the system that's going to take that jump this year?
Exactly.
Because they're good at that. They're very good at that.
And they've also been good. Danny Coulomb, one of the unsung heroes of their bullpen last year. They acquired him, 2 or 3 days before the season started. So there you go. There are going to be some acquisitions like that. There are probably some guys right now in camp that I haven't even thought about, other than just reading their name on the list of non-roster invitees, guys that no one has talked about that will contribute at some point in this year. So I'm not going to sit here and downplay the Kyle Bradish injury and what that could mean. It stinks. It stinks for them. There's no question, mainly because I was just thinking about the possibilities of a 1-2-3, not on March 28th, 30th, and April 1st, but thinking about it in terms of the first 3 games of a playoff series. That's pie in the sky exciting. That's 1971 Orioles exciting. Not saying as good, but just, you get my point. The Orioles haven't been.
Well, that's what it's going to take to win a championship. We're going to sit here and talk about Lamar until they win an AFC championship game now, of where that expectation is. The expectation is you think they're going to make the playoffs straight away.
Right.
It's February and they have to make the playoffs. They don't have to win 101 games. But they got to be ready for games 1, 2, and 3, and they better have starters that sound like the better guys in order to survive that in October, no matter where they finish.
And the good news is, because you did get Corbin Burnes, you still have legit ace, right? Legit number 1 pitcher established, just a couple years removed from being the NL Cy Young. And Grayson Rodriguez, still is someone that I have extremely high hopes for, and he pitched extremely well when he returned after the All-Star break. So I still like the potential. I like the established nature of what Corbin Burnes is and has been and should continue to be at age 29, even if it's 1 year, and then we'll see what happens with his contract and all that. But for 2024, I love having Corbin Burnes as my number one if I'm the Orioles, regardless of what's happened with Kyle Bradish. I would even still say I'm still really excited about the potential and ceiling of Grayson Rodriguez as a number two if Kyle Bradish doesn't come back and has to get Tommy John surgery. Now the question is, okay, Dean Kramer is your number three. I'm not liking that as much as Grayson Rodriguez as my number three. And then what does that mean for, okay, when is John Means going to pitch? Is it going to be the third or fourth week of April, like the Orioles are indicating? Seems like it could be quite plausible. Or is it going to be, he's kind of in and out of the rotation on the active roster, on the IL, is it like that? And that's why I said there's a cautionary tale about Tommy John surgery and why you don't just rush into surgery if a pitcher can rehab and continue pitching, because there are examples of that. So they've got to figure it out. But at the same time, there's still excitement. There's still optimism. There's still a heck of a lot to love about where this team is on the field. And that doesn't change just because of the disappointment of Bradish. So, we'll see how it plays out. And to your point, it's a canvas, right? It's a working canvas, your roster building, in the same way we've talked about that with the Ravens for years with late August additions. And heck, Kyle Van Noy arrived in week 4 last year. So, that applies for pitching. That applies for the Orioles here. And you hope with ownership and with new ownership coming at some point in the not too distant future, when and if it's made official, then they'll be able to fortify things. But in the meantime, got a lot of evaluating to do. And it's okay to keep your fingers crossed that maybe the Kyle Bradish thing does end up being Aaron Nola or Zach Gallen. But if not, life will go on, and the Orioles still have a lot going for them to be excited about. Even if, that's a big hit to endure on the first day of spring training, when, at least for my money, this was as excited as Orioles fans have been since I would venture to say 96, Pat Gillick, Davey Johnson, Roberto Alomar, David Wells, go down the list. I think it's been since that long since people were that excited. So, yeah, the day one news, it stinks. There's no question about it.
We will get some football in here. We're going to have plenty of baseball in here. Luke Jones is monitoring all things Orioles in Sarasota. We're doing Baltimore Positive. We're doing the Crab Cake Tour. Crab Cake Row is such a success. Big thanks to everybody. I've been playing all of these hours and hours of incredible people doing incredible things out in our community. My thanks to our friends at the Maryland Lottery. I have 10 times the cashes we'll be giving away when I put the Crab Cake Tour together into the early part of March. In the meantime, keep it glued at Baltimore Positive. Lots and lots of stuff coming out this week. I'm re-releasing the Peter Principles. I'm also going to be re-releasing the book I wrote about my father and my love of baseball. My dad's birthday is March 5th, so we're going to re-release that, written in 2006. It was a prelude to Free the Birds. So with all of this change blowing down at Camden Yards, I'm sort of bracing myself, getting ready for a beautiful baseball season around here, and some fresh air for Baltimore baseball fans around here and Orioles fans as well. And I didn't think the jerseys were all that awful. I mean, it's orange. I mean, what do you want it to look like? It looks like a pumpkin. I am Nestor. We are WNST, AM 1570, Towson, Baltimore. Is my orange too orange for you? We never stop talking Baltimore Positive. I look like I came out of the discount rack at TJ Maxx, because I did.